Ever since the dawn of civilization in the Americas, there have been stories of strange mysterious creatures. Stories of magical, powerful, mythical beings. And stories of fantastical, legendary places. Are these stories just legendary, fantastical tales? Or do these stories have some basis in reality? The answer to these questions is what we will try to find out. Here on Mysteries, Myths, and Legends of the Americas. It is the stuff of nightmares. Imagine, if you would. You are sitting at home enjoying your early morning routine. Then out of nowhere you hear a knock at the door. You find it odd because you were not expecting company. You answer the door and are surprised to see two children standing at the door. They appear to be in some sort of need and would like to come in. Being the kind-hearted person you are, you consider their request. However, that is when you notice it. These children are not normal kids. Instead, these kids have solid black eyes. No whites in their eyes. Just solid jet black eyes. You shut the door, but this only makes the kids angry and they begin to bang on your door, demanding that you let them in. After a few minutes the knocking stops and the children are nowhere to be seen. While this might sound like a pitch for the next Hollywood thriller, it sadly is not. Across North America there have been numerous reports of everyday people's encounters with these strange children. When one looks at these stories, it becomes clear that there are three distinct possibilities as to what these kids are. On this episode of Mysteries, Myths, and Legends of the Americas, we will tell three supposedly real stories about everyday people's encounters with black-eyed children. We will then explore the different possibilities as to what these children are. Finally, we will then see if we can't find an answer as to who, or what exactly, are the black-eyed kids terrorizing people across the Americas.
Let us in. Please let us in.
1996, Abilene, Texas. This is where our first story begins. Meet Brian Bethel, the man that skeptics claim is responsible for this no-nonsense urban legend. However, Brian takes offense to those claims as he says his encounter is real. Brian's story goes like this. It was a typical April evening. Brian said he was sitting in a parking lot filling out a check for his internet bill. The plan was to drop the check off in the drop box and then head home. Brian said he had just pulled out his checkbook and had signed his name on the check he was about to fill out. That's when he heard a knock on his car window. Startled, he looked up and saw two teenage-looking boys standing there. Annoyed, he rolled down his window to see what they wanted. He thought they were going to ask him for money, so he was a little surprised by their request. He said when he asked them what they wanted, one of the boys replied,
"Mister, we really want to see this movie, however, we left our money at our parents' house. Would you be so kind to give us a ride, so that we can retrieve our money and watch this movie?"
Brian says that he had already gotten a creepy feeling when the boys first arrived. It didn't help the feeling any when he looked up at the theater marquee. Mortal Kombat was playing. Strangely, it had already started. Brian said he looked back at the boys and told them, "Look, the movie has already started. By the time I drive you to your folks' home, to get the money and come back, the movie will pretty much be over." They continued going back and forth, and then that's when he saw it. These are not normal kids. They have black eyes, no whites in their eyes, just jet black eyes. As soon as he noticed it, Brian said, the other boy, who so far had been quiet, blinked his eyes in shock. He then, in an agitated voice, said,
"Look, mister, we cannot come in unless you let us."
By that point, Brian had managed to roll up his car window and start his car. The boys did not take too kindly to this, as they began to beat on his car window. Brian said they were pounding so hard that he was afraid the glass might break. Luckily, Luckily he was able to get out of the parking lot and onto the main road. However, as he looked back, the boys were gone. Brian said that he went home and shared his story to a group of friends in a private email group. He said the reason he did this was because he was worried about the effect this story would have on his job. You see, Brian was, and still is, a newspaper reporter. Brian's version of events goes that after he sent that email out, someone leaked it onto the internet. The story took off like wildfire and became such a story that he was eventually forced to officially come forward with his account. Skeptics say not likely. They say that Brian made up this entire story. They claim he himself leaked it onto the internet and then after a period of time came forward publicly with his story. So is Brian telling the truth, or is he some sort of con artist? What we do know is Brian's story is the linchpin of the skeptics' argument against black-eyed children. We will now explore the skeptics' point of view to see if they can prove that Brian is the fraud they claim him to be. Now that you heard Brian's account, it's time to face reality. Reality is really one, or two things. Either there are black-eyed children out there terrorizing unsuspecting people, or it's all just an urban legend. The skeptics say it's the latter. When researching this topic, we were surprised to find a full rebuttal video done by none other than PBS. PBS has a show called Monstrum which is hosted by neurologist Dr. Emily Zarka. Dr. Zarka does an excellent job presenting the skeptics' view of black-eyed children. So we will briefly go over the main points. If you want to see her full episode, you can check out the link below. The skeptic version of events goes like this. Brian Bethel, the newspaper reporter, for some reason, rather it was to play a prank, or try to gain some fame, created this story. The proof they claim is that prior to Bethel's publication of his account there has never been any news reports of people's encounter with black-eyed children. When Brian published his account, it was the early days of the internet. People were just learning the internet and were not familiar with all the craziness on the internet that we are today. So when people read this incredible encounter, it began to spread like wildfire on the internet. As people began to share the story with friends, the story grew bigger and bigger. It eventually took a life of its own. Dr. Zarka points to the fact that there is a black-eyed children comic book and a fan-made film about the children. Dr. Zarka also returns back to Brian's story to point out that his story is eerily similar to the vampire stories of old. Especially the part where they claim you have to let them in. She also claims that popular works of fiction existed at the time that could have inspired Bethel to create his story. She then uses science to try and explain how such a story would have a lasting effect on the brain. She said all of those factors combined with this explains how this story has taken off like it has. We here at Mysteries, Myths and Legends, however, tend to disagree with the skeptics and Dr. Zarka. Our own research has led us to data points that can contradict the skeptics' version of events. Our first point is that we have found evidence that suggests that stories of black-eyed children actually go as far back as the 1950s. However, we have not found any printed or recorded news sources that shows this. Also keep in mind though that stories of black-eyed children preceding Bethel's account can be interpreted in several different ways. One way the skeptics can interpret it is that somebody saw Bethel's account and then made up a story about how their grandparents saw a black-eyed child back in the day. Another way they can interpret it is that maybe Bethel had heard some of these stories and then decided to create his own. Or another way it can be interpreted is that these children really do exist. One more thing we want to say is that in our opinion, the skeptics are blowing out of proportion the amount of fandom the black-eyed children have on the internet. While yes, there is a comic and a following, it's not that big and can be hard to find. Also, from what we have seen, most people that have had an encounter had never heard of these children before. Even though we disagree with the skeptics, we could still be wrong. So are the skeptics right that Bethel is responsible for this urban legend? If you want to hear Bethel's account, we have attached a link so you can better judge the information for yourself. However, if Bethel is telling the truth, then that opens up two very disturbing possibilities. Our next story makes a good case that these children might be some type of ghost or spiritual being. 2009, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. The following story was posted online by an anonymous Marine, who claimed they were stationed there. Their story goes something like this. It was a weekend and most of the unit was on liberty. The Marine said they were in their barracks room relaxing. That's when they heard a knock. Initially they did not think anything about it. They thought it was probably just their roommate returning. So they got up and answered their door. To their shock, the person knocking was not their roommate. Instead it was two children standing at the door. However, these were not normal kids. The Marine instantly noticed the kids' black eyes. Able to control their fear, they looked at the kids and asked them what they wanted. That is when things begin to get even weirder. The kids replied, "It is cold outside and we want to come in and read." The Marine paused for a moment and looked down the hallway. There was no one around. It was just them and these terrifying kids. After a few seconds, the kids began to move as if they were coming into the room. The Marine was able to slam the door shut and lock the door before they could enter. However, the kids then became really angry and began to beat on the door. As they violently beat on the door, they demanded to be let in. The Marine said these kids were banging so hard on the door that the barracks window was rattling. The onslaught on the door continued for what seemed like several minutes. Then it stopped. After a few minutes of quiet, the Marine opened the door. The kids were gone. Dazed and confused, the Marine over the next several days began to covertly ask around if anybody had noticed, or heard about, any strange occurrences on base. Unfortunately for them, no one seemed to have noticed anything unusual. Frustrated, and with nowhere else to go, the Marine posted their story online with the hopes of finding some answers as to who, or what they encountered on that fateful day. Now this story could be easy to dismiss, especially considering that this story was posted anonymously online. However, as we researched this case, we came across other stories about Marines having encounters with these strange creatures. We interviewed one Marine, and not only did they confirm that they had heard about the original encounter at Camp Lejeune, but they also had an encounter at Camp Lejeune while posted there. Their story goes like this. They had heard about the previous story but did not think much of it. They assumed it was just a story. However, that all changed one evening. They said they were doing a roving patrol on base when they passed a street light. They said they noticed a kid standing under the light. However, this kid was wearing very dated clothing. Something that a person from the 1920s or 30s would wear. A little weirded out, the Marine said they begin to take a closer look. However, the Marine and the kid made eye contact. The Marine noticed the kid's eyes were jet black, no whites in their eyes, just jet black eyes. The Marine then hightailed it out of there. The Marine claimed that as they sped away from there, they did look back in their rear view mirror. Strangely though, the kid was gone. Now, while we cannot 100% verify the 2009 account, we do believe that the second story is 100% true, as it came from a trusted and reliable friend. We also believe their story gives the 2009 story enough credibility to assume that it also is a credible story. These two stories combined can make a powerful case for not only do black-eyed children exist, but they are some sort of ghost, or spiritual being. We will now look at the evidence in these two stories that supports the idea that these children are some sort of ghost, or spiritual being. If the previous story had you scratching your head in confusion, trust us, you are not alone. Believers in black-eyed children have been trying to figure out exactly what they are. Assuming the skeptics have completely missed the ball and these kids really do exist, then that really leaves one or two categories for them to fall under. The first category is that these kids are some kind of ghost, spiritual, or other paranormal being. This claim is thrown out a lot, and there is some aspects of black-eyed children stories that would seem to indicate that is the case. The interesting thing about the encounters we covered at Camp Lejeune have a lot in common with other black-eyed children stories. We are now going to analyze the Camp Lejeune encounters, and point to some of the evidence that supports these kids being some sort of ghost, or spiritual beings. The first odd thing that we want to point out about the 2009 Camp Lejeune story is the location on base where it took place. As most people who have served in the armed forces know, children roaming around the barracks is rare if not unheard of. Now that is not to say there is not children on base, as there is on-base housing for families of service members. However, barracks are usually reserved for the lower enlisted and people who do not have families of their own. Because of this, that makes the location of the story all the more weird and strange. Now the next strange thing, which you have now heard in all three stories, is the fact that these children seem to appear out of nowhere. They also seem to disappear the same way. If you look, you will probably see that 99.9% of all black-eyed children stories have this aspect in common. Another aspect that is often reported is just like the other encounter at Camp Lejeune, these children are often described as wearing outdated-looking clothing. Another indication that these children may be ghost is the strangeness of their request. Take the 2009 encounter for example. According to that story, the children were cold and wanted to come inside and read. This is just speculation here, but if the children were some sort of ghost from a bygone era, then that would make more sense, because when you think about it, most kids today would say, I want to come in and watch TV, or play games. Now, while there is evidence that these children are ghost, there is evidence that seems to be at odds with that assertion. The big piece of evidence is the fact that these children seem to be stopped by physical objects. Hence why they knock on doors. Now, while there is no definitive proof of ghost, or for that matter any knowledge on what a ghost can, or cannot do, it is generally believed a ghost should not be stopped by a physical object. Because of this, some people believe these children to actually be real flesh and blood children. Because these children seem to be able to be stopped by physical objects, two other possibilities are often thrown out. The first one is that these children are some sort of vampire. Supporters of this point to the fact that just like the vampire legends of old, the children have to be invited in. The other possibility thrown out is that these children are some kind of demon, or demon-possessed kids. Supporters of this theory point to the fact that these children have black eyes. Black or utter darkness is often associated with the devil or demonic forces. In some stories, that is the first thing that people assume when they encounter these kids. However, we here at Mystery, Myths, and Legends do not believe these last two options to be the case. We researched supposedly demon possessions. What we found was that contrary to what we see on TV, or in the movies, is that possessed people do not have black eyes, instead they are usually reported as being red or yellow. As for these children being some sort of vampire, we feel that they do not match well with what are the alleged attributes of a vampire. We say all of this to say that if only given those three options, then we would probably support the idea that these children are ghost. However, we do not think that is the case either. There is another alternative, and if true, it is much darker and worse than any of the previously mentioned three. We think this next story is the story that will finally reveal the identity of who or what these children really are. Vermont, 2016. If true, this story has it all. Not only does it show what happens if you allow these kids to enter, but it also might offer clues that might just pinpoint what these children really are. In 2016, an anonymous woman posted what she claims is her terrifying encounter with what turned out to be black-eyed children. Her story goes like this. It was a cold winter evening. This woman said that her and her husband were both sitting at home. She claims that outside there was a blizzard going on. That is all the more reason the woman was shocked to hear a knock on the door. At first she thought it was maybe just the wind. However, she heard it again, however this time it was a little more forceful. The woman looked outside and she didn't see anyone. However, she did see little feet print in the snow. At this point she is thinking that maybe somebody had a car accident, or got stranded in the storm, and are looking for some help. So she asked her husband to answer the door. To their shock, it was two children standing outside. The woman immediately noticed that the kids were definitely not dressed for the weather. She also said that she immediately got a feeling of dread. However, thinking that these kids needed some help, her and her husband let these kids in. They brought the kids into their living room. Hindsight being 2020, the woman noticed that her house cats seemed afraid of their new visitors. She even recalled one of her cats hissing at the children as they walked by. The woman asked them if they would like a cup of hot chocolate. Their response was,
"Our parents will be here shortly."
Strangely, that was their reply to anything that her or her husband asked. She went to the kitchen and made 2 cups of hot chocolate. She brought the cups back into the living room and handed them to the children. As they looked up, that's when she saw it. These were not normal children. Instead, these children had black eyes. No whites in their eyes, just cold, dark, black eyes. Stunned, she looked over to her husband, who out of nowhere had developed a nosebleed and was fumbling for a tissue. That's when the kids then asked,
"Can we please use your bathroom?"
By this point, fear had overtaken her to the point to where she could only point to where the bathroom was. The kids got up and walked toward the bathroom. However, that's when the power all of a sudden went out. The woman said she could see the kids just standing at the end of the hallway, and all they were doing was staring her down. Strangely, the kids then said,
"Our parents are here."
They then walked out the front door, not even bothering to close it. However, this is where the story gets even stranger. The woman said that she walked to the door and noticed a black SUV pull up. 2 tall men dressed in black suits got out of the vehicle. They then helped the children get into the vehicle. Once the children were in, the men jumped back into the SUV and sped off. Unfortunately, this woman's nightmare didn't end with the kids leaving. She said that a couple of weeks later, her husband was diagnosed with an aggressive form of skin cancer. She also says that she began to have regular nosebleeds, and her health has declined to the point that she is in the worst shape of her life. She adamantly believes this is all the result of the events that happened that fateful night. Now, we would be lying if we said that we knew 100% sure that this story was true. However, we here at Mysteries, Myths, and Legends believe her account. Not only do we believe her account, but we also believe her account provides us with clues as to what these children are. While there is a case that could be made that these children are some sort of ghost, vampire, or other spiritual being, however, we do not believe that to be the case. Instead, we believe that these children are human-alien hybrids. We know it's a bold claim, and we ask that you stay with us as we give you our rationale as to why we believe this. Now, why there is no definitive proof that what we call aliens exist. There is plenty of circumstantial evidence to suggest that not only do they exist, but they're here, right now on planet Earth. It is not fully known exactly what these creatures really are. We plan to do a video in the future breaking down the different theories as to what these strange humanoid creatures really are. For simplicity's sake, we are going with the standard theory that these are visitors from another planet. Before getting into how we believe these creatures and black-eyed children are related, we are first going to go over a few pieces of circumstantial evidence to show that it is likely these creatures are real. Now, there exists evidence that suggests that contact between humans and what has been nicknamed the Greys has occurred prior to 1947. We will cover that evidence in a future video. For simplicity's sake, we are going to start with 1947. On July 8, 1947, a press release by the Roswell Army Air Force Field shook the world. On that day, a press officer announced that the US Army had secured a crashed alien spacecraft. However, the next day the story was changed to say it was a weather balloon. Now the US government and military have adamantly denied this. However, several people who live in the area claim that not only was there a spacecraft recovered, there was also bodies. Those bodies are often described as being child-sized and having grey skin and two large black eyes. Over the next 2 decades, the US Air Force launched an investigation into alleged alien craft sightings. That investigation was known as Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book's conclusion was that most sightings of UFOs had a natural explanation. The ones that didn't probably still had a natural explanation. Therefore, UFOs are a natural phenomenon, and not an alien spacecraft. After Blue Book published their findings, the official response from the US government reiterated that same conclusion. They also claimed that the US government does not investigate UFOs. Fast forward to 2017 and we now know that was a big lie. In 2017, it was revealed that in 2007 a program was established. That program was called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. That program is commonly referred to as ATIP. The purpose of ATIP was to look at what they called UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomena. Around the same time, several videos were leaked that showed military encounters with very advanced-looking craft. The Pentagon confirmed these videos to be real, and Congress demanded the military provide a briefing on the matter. So far, the Pentagon has tried to dismiss these craft as being either Chinese or Russian craft. A ludicrous notion if you ask us. Also, some of the things the skeptics have identified as being the cause of these strange sightings are just as ludicrous. However, I digress. The main point is that we now know that UFOs or UAPs do exist. This piece of information opens up another troubling reality, one that has not really been addressed by the mainstream media. Another troubling aspect about this phenomenon is the fact that across the globe thousands of people have claimed that not only have they seen a UFO, but they also were abducted by said UFO. What is even weirder is that these craft have been repeatedly described as looking just like the craft that the Pentagon admitted was real in those now famous naval videos. Now, it is not known for sure when the first supposedly alien abduction took place. We've seen evidence that suggests this may have been going on for some time. However, it is generally accepted that Antonio Vilas Boas' alleged abduction, which occurred on October 16, 1957, is the first recorded incident. After Antonio's alleged abduction, reports of other people's abduction began to come in. In fact, it had become such a problem that in the early 1990s, psychologist Dr. John Mach began an investigation into this phenomenon. Dr. John Mach was not your ordinary run-of-the-mill psychologist. Instead, he was a well-respected psychologist and held the pristine position of head of Harvard Psychiatric Department. At first, like most psychologists, John Mach believed that reported alien abductions were reported by people who had some sort of mental health problem, or was caused by sleep paralysis or some sort of other mental condition. However, he soon came to the conclusion that these cases were indeed real. Dr. Mach went on to author several books on the subject. One was called Abduction and the other was called Passport to the Cosmos. As one can imagine, Mach's work was controversial. In fact, an attempt was made to have him removed from his pristine position at Harvard. Luckily, Harvard ruled in his favor and he was allowed to keep his position and research his newfound belief. Which he did. It is from his work that we learned of probably the most credible encounter with these grey beings. As John Mach was conducting his research, he learned of an incredible case that occurred on September 16, 1994 at the Aerial School located in Rua, Zimbabwe. The story went like this: several children were outside on the playground when they saw an alien spaceship land in the schoolyard. The ship looked like the typical flying saucer shape that is often associated with these creatures. They then claimed that a grey alien stepped out of the craft and began to communicate with the children telepathically. According to the children, it was a warning that we humans are destroying this planet. The alien then got back on board and the ship left. Mach went to Zimbabwe and interviewed the children. Amazingly, all of the stories were the same. This led Mach to the belief that this was a legit encounter. It also has proved to be a baffling case for the skeptics to dismiss. The best they can say is that this was a case of mass hallucination. Interestingly, the kids to this day still cling to their story. In the description below we have provided a link to an interview that was done with these kids in order for you to make an opinion on this bizarre encounter. Unfortunately, Dr. Mach was hit by a car and subsequently died in 2004. However, he is not the only scientist that has been looking into this matter. Dr. David M. Jacobs has also been looking into this matter. Dr. Jacobs has written a terrifying book appropriately named The Threat. We believe that both Mach's work and Jacobs' work provides us enough evidence to suggest that these black-eyed kids are human-alien hybrids. Now keep in mind that both Mach's and Jacobs' work is extremely controversial. The main reason it is controversial is that it uses hypnosis in order to bring back memories. The strange thing about alleged alien abductions is that the abductee doesn't remember much of the encounter. Sometimes, they remember seeing a UFO and then wake up, and look at their watch and realize several hours have elapsed and they have no idea what has happened. Others have reoccurring nightmares. However, they cannot remember the nightmare once they awaken. It is because of this that they both resorted to using hypnosis in order to help the alleged abductee uncover what has happened. There is a lot of material in their books. However, both of them reached the conclusion that there is a breeding program going on. Jacobs' work goes into more details about this program than Mach's work does. Jacobs' work has uncovered that these aliens are using human sperm and eggs and then are mixing it with their own DNA. Abductees have reported encountering this offspring. Some of them are described as looking human, however they retain the aliens' black eyes. Also, some of the abductees claim that these children seem to retain the telepathic abilities that their alien parents possess. Abductees have also reported that these children also help their alien parents in abductions. If you want to learn more, then we would recommend you check out Dr. Jacobs' book The Threat, as it has lots of information and extremely creepy findings. We real quick want to return to the Vermont story. Another interesting aspect is that in that story the kids were picked up by men in black suits. This is interesting because when it comes to UFO or alien encounters, hundreds if not thousands of people claim that not long after their encounter men in black suits show up. Most people assume they are government agents. However, upon closer inspection some people realize these men may not be human at all. We cannot confirm these stories, however we have provided a link in the description below to give you more details about these strange encounters. We find it interesting though that these children referred to these men as their parents. The men in black oftentimes have the same traits that are associated with black-eyed children. They show up out of nowhere and have an unexplainable intimidating presence. So in conclusion, here is the main reasons why we believe that black-eyed children are human-alien hybrids. The first thing is that these children usually appear and disappear out of nowhere. It has been said that aliens possess this same ability. Next, we do know that UFOs do exist thanks to an official admission by the US government. Next, we do know that craft that look similar to the craft that the US government admitted are indeed real have been reported in abduction reports, extending all the way back to at least the 1950s. Next, we have accounts from multiple people who claim to have been abducted. Those people claim that a breeding program is going on, and not only that, but that they themselves have interacted with the offspring. The offspring is oftentimes described as looking human, minus the black eyes. These kids are often said to retain the telepathic abilities that their alien parents possess. Along with the black eyes, another staple of black-eyed kids' stories are that they seem to have some kind of telepathic ability. Some people have described that when encountering black-eyed children their hands would move against their will. Unexplainably their hands would attempt to open the door for the children to enter. It took extreme mental focus in order to stop their hands from opening the door. Because of all of these reasons we here at Mysteries, Myths and Legends believe that black-eyed children are none other than human-alien hybrids. That concludes this episode. Tell us your thoughts and opinions on who or what you think these terrifying kids are. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the share button, as it helps immensely. We look forward to catching you again on another episode of Mysteries, Myths, and Legends of the Americas.